Assalamualaikum, my name is Arafat and welcome to a brand new video. I've received a request to do a Quran video, like what Quran do you use, so on and so forth. And so I've chosen a few Qurans that I use constantly. I have Quran that I've not read before, and so it's always important to read the Quran that you have and not just shelf them, right? So I'm guilty of them, of doing these things, but inshallah I'll get to one of these days, probably in 2024 also, inshallah. But so these are the Qurans that I have here. You can see, I'll show it to you, that I constantly use. And some of these are Qurans that I've used before a lot of times, and then I've got new Qurans, so I'm now using the new Qurans and so forth. And so I would like to show them to you. But first things first, my primary Quran now that I've been using for years is the Medina Mus'haf, the famous Medina Mus'haf. And the reason why I've switched is because that this is the standard text, the standard text in a sense whereby all Qurans have standard text, but the layout, the configuration is standard, so it's much easier for me to, like when I listen to lectures and so forth, when someone is saying that this verse, so on and so on and so forth, and so I can easily get my head around it, and I know exactly where the verses are. And so this is the standard Medina Mus'haf. This is in A4, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the bigger version. My aunt has a much bigger version, right? I think it's about twice the size of this A2, the A2 version. But I don't need it. I'm not blind, short-sighted or something like that. So this is the Mus'haf, you can see, right? This is the new version of the Medina Mus'haf. My uncle has the older version, whereby the paper is much thicker, right? I do have the older version as well. It was my grandma's, but I read from mine. This was a gift from my mom, by the way, and so I'm using it. And so this is my primary Mus'haf that I use, the Medina Mus'haf. One thing to be sure though is you do need to have a seal or chop somewhere that shows that it is authentic, right? I'm not sure if that's what it is, but there are some Mus'haf that does not have chop, and so it has not been checked for errors and so forth. So always get the ones with a seal. Now if you are familiar with if you go to Saudi Arabia, you also find a similar Mus'haf, right? But the back ones is plain. Either one of the sides are plain, meaning there's no decorations. Those are the Riyadh Mus'haf, and those are not the Medina Mus'haf. Right? And so the Riyadh Mus'haf, you'll get like notes at the sides, right? Which I don't have the Riyadh Mus'haf, and so I'll just use the Medina Mus'haf. Next one is another Mus'haf that I'm using, is this Mus'haf, and this is by Cordoba International, and Karya Bestari, and this is the Uthmani Rasam, right? So it is the Rasam Osmani. The good thing about this Mus'haf is that it has the translation underneath, right? And it is color coded, and so it's much easier for you to do a tajweed, and as well as the grammatical rules. But also within the gold and black letters, it tells you which are the next words, right? And so for me, if you are not really familiar, like myself, I'm not a native speaker of Arabic, and I don't know a lot of Arabic vocabularies, and so it is always helpful, because then you can read, and then you can also memorize the words and so forth, right? And you can also know a little bit about the grammar as well. So this is the Mus'haf um, that I took with me when I'm traveling, because this is big. This is so big, right? You can't travel with this. But yeah, I don't prefer to use Quran on the phone, right? Although sometimes I use, but I will much prefer reading from a physical Mus'haf, because I can't read from a screen for too long. I'll get headache. This is the next one, is the most famous one. I'm sure everybody know. This is the Abdullah Yusuf Ali. Um, um, how I got this Mus'haf is kind of a funny story. I did not buy this. It was given by my Christian neighbor. and so, and ironically, this is the first Mus'haf that I read in English, right? And so, a Christian neighbor of mine who goes to the church just next to my apartment. There's a Catholic church next to my apartment, and so he gave my mom this Mus'haf, and then my mom gave it to me because it is in English. And so this is the first Mus'haf that I read in the English language the whole way through, right? And this is a very great Mus'haf, I would say. It has the introduction, it has the appendix, right? It has the introduction, so on and so forth, and it is Christian oriented, right? So it is written, it is meant to be read from a Christian perspective, from a Christian to understand the Islamic perspective. And so this is a Mus'haf that I read, the English translation. The translation, it's Abdullah Yusuf Ali, so the translation is the early 20th century translation, but I enjoy it. Although sometimes it is annoying a little bit, because I'm not so fond of the earlier 20th century, like thou, those, and so forth. Sometimes it's difficult for me to understand. But nevertheless, this is a beautiful translation. I think it tries to mimic the rhymes of the Quran, right? So yeah, this is a great translation. It has footnotes and so forth. And so if you are looking to, buy present for your Christian neighbors, so on and so forth, for them to understand the Quran from a Christian perspective, or to read the Quran from a Christian perspective, then I think this Mus'haf is the way to go. It is quite expensive though. Recently I saw on Amazon this price about $50, so it is on the higher pricier side. Next Mus'haf is actually my very first Mus'haf, right? The Holy Quran. It has the transliteration in Roman script. Again, this is the translation of Abdullah Yusuf Ali. This is the Quran that I grew up with, right? It has the brown pages. This is the early 2000s. And so yeah, this is you have three columns. You have the English, the Romanized script, and then you have the Arabic script here, right? And so this is the Holy Quran. What brand is this? Which publisher this is? Because whenever I review books, some of you ask, this is the publisher, printed in India, so on and so forth. So this is my very first Mus'haf, the early 2000s. Next Mus'haf is a Mus'haf that I use to read the English, to read the translation. And this is by Darussalam, an interpretation of the meanings of the Noble Quran. Interpretations of the meaning of the Noble Quran. And so this is you can see here, it has the hadith notes, and the Arabic script is here, and then the English. Now the English is, I'm not saying that the English is great, so on and so forth, but this is the translation that I use, right? The English translation that I use. One of the great things about this translation is that, for example, it doesn't translate a lot of the words, right? As-salat, it doesn't translate as-salat. See here, right? And zakat as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it doesn't translate, because these are terms that is important, right? Like zakat is like alms giving, salat is like worship or prayers, right? And the other thing is awliya. Okay, it doesn't translate, but it gives in bracket what is the meaning, right? Like friends or protectors and helpers, right? And so this is something that I appreciate. Not a lot of translation does this, whereby they would translate key terminologies. The other thing is that Allah, it doesn't translate the word Allah as the God, but it gives it, where is it? Yeah, it leaves it as Allah, right? And so these are some terminologies, key terminologies, that is important. And also it's easier for me to reference it back to the Arabic, right? And so there's a lot of other Qur'ans that I use. For example, the study Qur'an, the Arabic grammar that I use. If I can just show you, the Arabic grammar that I use is, apart from the Darussalam, I have the Darussalam Arabic course here. Right here you can see in 3 volumes. But when it comes to strictly the Arabic language of the Quran and nothing else, doesn't contain like modern Arabic literature, I use the Arabic through the Quran, Ellen Jones. So this is where I get my Quran grammar, the very difficult Arabic Quranic grammar, and also the books that I use to memorize vocabularies of the Quran. And so, yep, it is more Arabic focus, Quran focus. Let me just straighten you up. It is more Quran focus, rather than you have words from modern Arabic, words from classical Arabic, so on and so forth, like the 3 volume of the Medina Arabic course. And so I would recommend that, I found it beneficial for me actually, and I would recommend to actually start with just Quranic Arabic focus, because that is the main thing, and then the modern standard Arabic comes from the Quranic Arabic. And so this is something that has been suggested to me as well. Unless you want to learn to speak Arabic, right? For me, I'm more interested in learning the language of the scripture rather than to speak the language. Like for example, I'm interested in learning the language of the Quran, right? Or the New Testament Greek, the Hebrew language of the Torah, for example, rather than to speak this language. Because speaking and trying to learn the Arabic grammar or the Greek grammar and the language of the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible and the Quran, these are completely 2 different things. If you're trying to speak the language, it's much better for you to memorize the vocabulary. Then afterwards, the grammar will come, bits and pieces here and there. But if you really want to focus on just learning the language of the Quran, so that you can actually understand the arrangement, why was the words of the Quran arranged a certain way, then it is much better endeavor to actually focus on the Arabic of the Quran, as well as the the New Testament, so on and so forth, if you're interested in learning the Greek of the New Testament, so on and so forth. It is a difficult language to learn, especially for me. I'm not really I'm not good at learning languages, but it is a step-by-step process to learn the grammar, to learn the different articles, and how the language actually works, and so forth. I'm still figuring that out. But yeah, I would say that the Arabic grammar through the Quran is something that I would recommend if you really want to focus on the Quran. Whereas if you want to speak the Arabic language, then I think the Medinan course in 3 volumes would be beneficial for you. But I'm not interested to speak the language. I'm more interested to see the arrangement of the Quran, so on and so forth. I have a bonus point here. There's a lot of people commenting on my channel that says that why don't you address the textual criticism of the Quran, so on and so forth. And so I'll turn to Surah Maryam, right? So Surah Maryam has a rhyme. After it rhymes for the first 30 or so verses, and then it goes into this page or this section that also rhymes, but the rhymes is not with the iya, so on and so forth, sharakiya. So it rhymes a different way. And so when it rhymes the different ways, some Orientalists of the past and some modern scholars who criticize the Quran, they try to argue for that this verse is actually an interpolation, right? So for example, when it describes the story of Ismail, the story of Musa or Moses or Ibrahim, so on and so forth, and then also towards the later verses whereby it talks about the how the people actually get what do you call it in English, whereby the people will receive intercession in the day of judgment, on the day of judgment, so on and so forth. Whereas this passage, the rhymes are different, right? The rhymes are different, so it no longer rhymes the same way as the first few verses and the last few verses, like the middle section of Surah Maryam, right? And so some non-Muslim Quran scholars suggest that this is an interpolation, or this is a later addition to the text of Surah Maryam. Whereas if you look at all the ancient manuscripts of the Quran, all the early manuscripts of the Quran, right, this verse is actually there, right? All these verses that doesn't rhyme or has a different kind of rhyme or rhythmic patterns to it is all present even in the Sana palimpsest. Right? The Sana palimpsest, if you do not know, the Sana palimpsest has 2 kinds of text actually. It has the underlayered text, which has been erased, right, which we can still see now under specific lighting conditions. And so even the Sana palimpsest from Yemen has these verses, right, these so-called interpolated verses. And so the uniformity of the Quranic text, right, we have it in whole. It is nothing compared. Some Christians apologists out there who try to defend their Christian tradition, especially try to defend in an attempt of them trying to defend the New Testament, they actually quote unquote provoke the Quran, or phrase the argument in a way whereby to undermine the preservation of the Quranic text. And so one of these verses that they actually goes to is Surah Maryam, right, the middle section of Surah Maryam. And so if you look at all the early manuscripts of the Quranic text, these verses are actually there. Right, so these verses are actually there. Let me just try to point to a few. So I have Surah Maryam open here. So probably I'll dedicate a video to this, but it doesn't rhyme with iya, 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 iya. It rhymes with a different, although it rhymes with a different pattern, with a different note, so to speak. But within this particular section, it rhymes as well. It has a different rhythmic pattern. And so this is found in all the early manuscripts of the Quran. Right. We have the complete Quran. The complete Quran within the 7th century. Right. Within the 7th century, we have the complete Quran. And the text of the Quran is uniform as what I have here. Right. What I'm holding here, the Surah Maryam that I have here, chapter 19 of the Quran, chapter Mary, it is actually uniform with the early Quran that we have in the 7th century. Right. Some people will go to the Mus'haf of some Mus'haf. I will not name the scholar because I do not want to promote his work, because his work has been refuted, heavily refuted. But he goes through all these different Mus'haf, these different manuscripts, I would say, manuscripts, and then he would point out the mistakes here and there, that this verse is here but this verse is not there, so on and so forth. But that doesn't prove anything, right? That doesn't prove anything, because what is not found here is found in there, and is found in a lot of other manuscripts. And so we wouldn't use the same argument when we go to the manuscripts of the biblical text, because that doesn't prove anything, right? And so there's a lot of the verses that Christian apologists has attempt to demonstrate, though not successfully in my opinion, that there has been an interpolation and so on and so forth. And so one of the arguments, and I think this is a very cheap argument, one of the arguments that they propose is that, even though these clauses in this section in Surah Maryam, that has a different rhythmic patterns to it, has a different endings to it, although this section is found in the earliest manuscripts, in all of the earliest manuscripts, including the Sana palimpsest, these sections must have been interpolated pre all the earliest manuscripts that we have, just because they have a different kind of rhythmic patterns to it. Well, that is trying to presuppose the pattern of the Quran from a biblical point of view. Right? So you can't use a biblical standard to presuppose the same standard as the Quran, because it is a completely different text, completely different rhythmic patterns, and so forth. In fact, the New Testament itself doesn't even rhyme, right? Certain parts of the Hebrew Bible does rhyme, but the New Testament itself doesn't have these rhythmic patterns to it. You find every now and then, here and there, right, which I think could be a translation of the Greek from the Aramaic, which goes back to the Injil the Injil of Jesus, just like the same way certain parts of the Hebrew Bible has a very rhythmic pattern to it. When you actually hear rabbis recite these verses, it rhymes, and so it kind of rhymes the same way as the Quran would rhymes, or rhymes in a sense whereby it is very similar to the language of the Quran, even though that doesn't prove anything. But what I'm presupposing is that since it is quite similar to the language of the Quran, this could be a wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has been preserved in the Torah or in the Injil, for example, right? Which, we don't have the Torah and the Injil that was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we do have remnants of it left. And if you deny this, meaning you need to really rethink about this, because there are certain passages of the Torah and the Injil that actually corroborates with the Quran, that they are in agreement, complete agreement, right, well, with the Quran. And in fact, they say the same thing as what the Quran says, right? Like for example, John 17:3, right, is like the Tawheed creed that is in the New Testament. And certain parts of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, in Genesis, for example, the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, story of Joseph, is quite similar to the story of the Quran, in the Quran, although the certain parts of the details they differ, right? But these are glosses here and there we can attribute to that. But either way, I digress. So that is the Quran that I use on a frequent basis, or used to use them on a frequent basis. I have a lot of other Qurans, but there's no point reviewing all of them. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you in my next video. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.